The first time Mira touched the sealed wall, the steward caught her by the wrist so hard the ash bucket slipped from her hand and spilled across the royal corridor like gray snow. He did not shout at first. That was what frightened her most. He only leaned close enough for her to smell the cloves on his breath, and said, "Touch that wall again, and you will be punished." Then, from behind the stones, so faint Mira almost believed grief had invented it, a child whispered, "Please, do not leave me." Mira froze. The steward's fingers tightened. Behind them, the castle slept under winter darkness. Ahead of them stood a bricked-up archway no servant was allowed to name, sealed with old mortar, black wax, and the regent's mark pressed into every corner. Everyone in Greyvale Castle knew the rule. You did not ask about the sealed wing. You did not sweep near it longer than necessary. You did not look at the cracks between the stones. And you certainly did not answer when something inside cried. But Mira had been hungry long enough to know the sound of hunger. She had been cold long enough to know the sound of someone forgotten. And when that small voice begged for water, the rule stopped feeling like a rule. It felt like a crime. Before we go deeper, tell me honestly in the comments, if you were a powerless servant and a child begged from behind a forbidden wall, would you obey and survive, or risk everything to answer? Mira was 16, though the kitchen mistress said hunger had made her look 12, and work had made her eyes look 40. She had come to Greyvale 3 years earlier, after the river took her father's mill and fever took her mother in the same bitter spring. The castle did not hire girls like her out of kindness. It swallowed them. It gave them a straw pallet under the bakery stairs, crusts too hard for the dogs, and work that began before the roosters and ended after the nobles had spilled wine on clean floors. Mira was a scullery girl, which meant she belonged to the lowest heat of the kitchen. She scrubbed pots until her knuckles cracked. She hauled water until her shoulders shook. She carried ash from the hearths before dawn, when the castle corridors were empty and even the guards leaned into sleep. That was how she found the wall. Not all at once. Not like a door in a fairy tale. At first it was only a sound, a whimper, thin as a thread. She heard it while dragging 2 ash buckets past the old royal wing, the part of the castle that faced the eastern cliffs. The corridor there was colder than the rest, and the stones always seemed damp, though no rain reached that far inside. Tapestries had once hung there, but their hooks were empty. The windows were shuttered from the outside. At the end stood the sealed arch, bricked from floor to ceiling. Mira had passed it many times. Every servant had. Most kept their eyes lowered. That morning, she stopped. The sound came again. Not wind, not rats, not the settling of stone. A child crying. Mira set down the buckets. Her heart began to beat in a way she could feel behind her teeth. She stepped closer to the wall and pressed her ear to the cold brick. Nothing. Then a weak breath. Then, "Mama?" Mira pulled back so quickly she almost fell. For one wild second she thought of ghosts. Greyvale had enough stories to feed 100 winter nights. Servants whispered of Queen Alawen, who vanished 7 years before. They whispered of her little son, Prince Caelan, who died of fever the same week. They whispered of Regent Ormond, the king's younger brother, who had taken the throne until a new heir could be named. But ghosts did not cough, and ghosts did not ask for water. Mira lifted a trembling hand to the brick. That was when Steward Varick appeared out of the dark like he had grown from it. He was tall, narrow, and dressed too finely for a servant, with a silver chain of office across his chest, and a ledger always tucked beneath one arm. He ruled the lower staff the way the regent ruled the court, with smiles sharp enough to cut and punishments delivered where witnesses could learn from them. His hand snapped around Mira's wrist. "What are you doing?" Mira opened her mouth. No answer came. Varric looked at the wall, then at her face. Something in his eyes changed, not surprise exactly, but fear covered quickly by anger. "Did you hear something?" Mira thought of the voice saying "Mama." She thought of the way hungry children sounded in a market when their mothers had no bread. She looked down and whispered, "Only the wind, sir." He slapped the ash bucket with his boot, sending soot across the stones. "Listen to me, kitchen rat. That wing was sealed by order of His Grace the Regent, after sickness took the Queen's household. No one enters, no one touches, no one speaks of it." His voice lowered. "Touch that wall again, and you'll be punished. Not kitchen punishment, not a missed meal. Do you understand?" Mira nodded. Words. "I understand." He released her wrist and wiped his fingers on a handkerchief as if poverty-stained. "Good. Clean this before the guard rounds. And if I hear one whisper in the kitchens, I will know where it began." He walked away. Mira stood shaking in the cold corridor until she heard his footsteps fade. Then the wall whispered, "Are you still there?" Every lesson she had learned in the castle rose inside her at once. Keep your head down. Survive. The powerful do not forgive curiosity. A poor girl has no truth anyone cares to hear. But the voice was so small. Mira pressed her lips close to the mortar and breathed, "Yes." There was a pause. Then the child said, "I am thirsty." That was the moment Mira's life divided in two, before she answered the wall, and after. She did not sleep that day. She moved through the kitchens like a girl walking underwater. The cooks yelled. The spit boy kicked her heel when she dropped a ladle. Mistress Sella cuffed the back of her head for burning a sleeve on the oven door. But all Mira heard was, "I am thirsty." At supper, when the servants were given cabbage water and barley crust, Mira saved half her portion under her apron. She had stolen food before, but only scraps. A bone with a little marrow, a bruised apple. This felt different. This felt like putting her neck under an axe she could not see. She also stole a cracked clay cup from the wash table and filled it at the pump in the scullery. Water sloshed against her thigh as she walked. Every step sounded too loud. She waited until the kitchen settled into the deep night rhythm. Banked fires, snoring boys, mice in the flour bins, the distant clink of guards changing posts. Then she crept out. Greyvale at night was a different castle. The great halls that glittered by candlelight became caverns of shadow. Statues of dead kings watched from alcoves. The floor held cold like a grudge. Mira moved barefoot so her shoes would not click. At the sealed corridor, she found the wall and listened. For a long moment, nothing. Panic touched her throat. What if the child had been moved? What if Varric had found him? What if she had imagined all of it? Then came the cough. Mira whispered, "I brought water." The wall answered with a scrape, then a child's voice. "Where?" "I don't know how to pass it." "There is a small place near the floor. On my side, it lets in dust." Mira knelt and ran her fingers along the bottom stones. Most were sealed tight with old mortar, but near the left side, behind a clump of fallen plaster, she found a narrow crack. Too small for the cup, too small for bread, but not too small for water if she had cloth. She tore a strip from the hem of her already ruined shift, soaked it in the cup, twisted it thin, and pushed one end into the gap. "Put your mouth near it," she whispered. There was a rustle behind the wall. Then the cloth tugged. The child made a sound that broke her heart. Not a sob, not a laugh, but relief, too weak to become either. Mira soaked the cloth again and again until the cup was empty. Then she tore the bread into crumbs and worked them through one by one. It took forever. Her knees went numb, her hands shook. But the child ate every crumb. "What is your name?" Mira asked. A pause. "Kale." Mira stopped breathing. "Kale. That is what my mother called me when she wanted me to laugh. My whole name is Kalen." No, it was impossible. The prince was dead. Everyone knew the prince was dead. The bells had rung 7 years ago. The court had worn black. The kitchens had baked funeral loaves. The regent had wept in the chapel, or so the servants said. Mira leaned closer. "How old are you?" 9, I think. 7 years. Prince Kalen would be 9. Mira swallowed. "Who put you there?" The child was quiet so long she thought he would not answer. Then he whispered, "The man with the red ring." Regent Ormond wore a garnet signet ring. Mira had seen it once when he passed through the kitchen court on his way to hunt, a red stone like a drop of frozen wine. "He said I was safer if the kingdom thought I was gone," Kale whispered. "He said bad men wanted the crown. He said my mother was ill." Then the door closed. Then the stones came. Mira's stomach turned. "Have you been there all this time?" "No. There are rooms behind me, old rooms, a bed, a chest, books. Sometimes a woman came with food through a small iron panel in another passage, but she stopped coming 3 days ago." "What woman?" "I don't know. She never showed her face. She cried once when I asked about my mother." Mira pressed her forehead to the stone. A hidden child, a stolen prince, a dead queen who might not have died as the story said, and her, a scullery girl with soot under her nails, holding all of it in the dark. If you're listening to this and your heart is already racing, hit like for Mira's courage, because from this point on, every kind thing she does becomes more dangerous. Mira should have run to someone important. That is what stories tell you to do. Find a noble lord. Find a captain. Find the priest. Speak truth and watch justice rise. But truth in Greyvale did not rise. It sank if no powerful hand pulled it up. Mira had seen a laundress dismissed for accusing a guard of stealing wages. She had seen a stable boy beaten for repeating a joke about the regent's taxes. She had seen Mistress Sella bow so low to Steward Varick that her forehead nearly touched the table, then turn around and strike a child for breaking a cup. A poor girl's word could not move a throne. So Mira chose the only thing she could do. She kept the prince alive. For the next 2 nights she returned with water, softened bread, and bits of cheese stolen from platters before they went upstairs. She learned the rhythm of the guards. She learned which floorboards complained. She learned that Varick made rounds after midnight, but never before the chapel bell at 3. Through the crack, Kale told her things in whispers. He remembered his mother singing with the window open. He remembered a white hound with one brown ear. He remembered hiding under a table while men argued in the next room. He remembered his mother kneeling before him, pushing back his hair and saying, "Whatever they tell you, you are not alone." Then he remembered smoke. Not fire everywhere, he said, just smoke in the passage, and shouting, and the man with the red ring carrying him away while he cried for her. "Can you prove who you are?" Mira asked on the 3rd night. "I have the mark," he whispered. "What mark?" "Mother called it my moon coin, on my shoulder." Mira knew the old royal tale. The first king of Greyvale had been born with a pale silver mark shaped like a crescent beneath his collarbone. The mark had appeared in the bloodline now and then, always treated like a sign from heaven. On feast days, minstrels sang that the true heirs carried moonlight in their skin. Can anyone see it? Not through a wall. That was when despair nearly crushed her. Mira could feed him for a day, maybe a week, but she could not prove he existed. She could not carry him through stone. She could not stand before nobles and say, "I heard a royal secret while hauling ash." And the castle was beginning to notice. On the fourth morning, the guards searched the servant quarters. Mira woke to shouting. Doors banged open. Straw pallets were kicked apart. A boy named Tommen began crying when a guard found 2 stolen pears under his blanket. Mistress Sella stood pale by the oven as Varric walked between the servants with his ledger under one arm. "Someone has been stealing from the upper stores," he said. "Bread, cheese, a cup, a length of candle. Small things, yes, but small thefts feed larger treasons." His eyes moved across the line of servants and stopped on Mira. Her heart dropped. Varric smiled gently. "Mira, is it? Show your hands." She held them out. They were raw from work, blackened at the nails, and still marked by a thin scratch from the wall's rough stone. Varric took her wrist and turned it. "How did you get this?" "A pot cracked, sir." "Which pot?" Mira did not blink. "The copper stew pot with the loose handle." Mistress Sella, who hated lies unless they protected her kitchen, snapped, "It did crack. I told you last month it would." Varric glanced at her. His smile faded. Then he released Mira. "No servant leaves the lower halls tonight," he said. "Any person found above the blue stair after curfew will be whipped from service and sent to the road." The road. In winter, that was nearly a sentence by itself. Mira spent the day with fear crawling under her skin. By dusk, she had made a plan and hated it. She could not go above the blue stair. But the laundry chute ran from the linen rooms near the old royal wing down to the wash court. It was narrow, filthy, and steep. No sane person would climb it. Mira had never been accused of sanity, only survival. She stole a heel of bread, a strip of dried beef, and a little flask from the cook's private shelf. Then she waited until the kitchen snored. She tied her skirt between her knees, wrapped rags around her hands, and climbed into the chute. The passage smelled of soap, mold, and old dust. Splinters caught her sleeves. Twice she slipped and nearly slid back down into the laundry baskets. By the time she reached the upper grate, her arms trembled so badly she had to bite her sleeve to keep from making noise. She pushed the grate open. A guard stood 10 steps away. Mira froze inside the wall. He was young, with tired eyes and a helmet too large for him. He turned at the faint creak. Mira held her breath. Then, from somewhere below, another guard laughed and called his name. The young guard looked away. Mira slipped out like a shadow and ran barefoot down the corridor. At the sealed wall, Cale was crying again, not loudly, but in the exhausted way children cry when they no longer expect rescue. "I'm here," Mira whispered. The crying stopped. "I thought you were gone." "I had to find another way. I tried to be brave. I know." She fed him through the crack, crumb by crumb. Then she said, "Cale, listen carefully. Is there any way out on your side? Any door? Any window?" "The windows are barred from outside. The passage door is locked. The iron panel where food came is shut. I tried the old fireplace, but stones fell." "Is the wall loose anywhere?" "Near your voice, maybe. When I press, dust falls." Mira ran her fingers over the brickwork. There. One stone near the lower curve of the arch shifted slightly under pressure. Not enough to remove, enough to hope. Hope can be cruel when it arrives too small. She needed tools, not kitchen knives, not spoons. Real tools, a chisel, a hammer, something to scrape mortar without sounding like a smithy. The castle carpenters kept their chests near the stable court, guarded by locks and a man who slept lightly. Mira had no key, no money, no friend foolish enough to help, except maybe one. Old Bren, the coal carrier, had worked at Greyvale since before Mira was born. He was bent nearly double and smelled permanently of smoke. Most people thought he was simple because he spoke slowly. Mira knew he simply refused to waste words on fools. The next day, while dumping ash behind the bakehouse, Mira found Bren stacking coal. She said softly, "Did Queen Elawin die in the East Wing?" Bren's hand stopped. For a moment, only the coal shifted. Then he said, "That question can bury a girl. What if someone was buried first?" Bren looked at her then. Really looked. His eyes were pale and wet with age, but not weak. "What did you hear?" Mira almost told him everything, but fear held her tongue. Trust was expensive, and she owned nothing. "A child," she whispered. Bren closed his eyes. The silence stretched so long, Mira thought he might turn away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small iron tool wrapped in cloth. "A mason's pick," he said, "for clearing old mortar. Quiet if your hands are patient." Mira stared. "Why do you have this?" Bren's mouth trembled. "Because 7 years ago, my daughter carried trays to the Queen's rooms. She vanished the night the wing was sealed. Vorik told me sickness took her. Wouldn't let me see your body." Mira felt the world tilt. Was she the woman bringing food? "I have asked myself that every day since." He pushed the tool into her hand. "If the dead are knocking, child, open carefully." That night, Mira returned with the pick hidden under ash rags. She worked for hours. Scrape, pause, listen, scrape, pause, listen. Every sound seemed enormous. Every falling grain of mortar felt like thunder. Behind the wall, Cale stayed awake and whispered when guards passed too near. Once, torchlight slid along the corridor. Mira flattened herself behind a broken statue niche, the pick clutched under her apron. Steward Varric passed with 2 guards. "Double the watch near the East Wing," he said. "His Grace wants no disturbance before the feast." "What feast?" one guard asked. "The Oath Feast. 3 nights from now, the nobles will renew their loyalty to Regent Ormond as Lord Protector. After that, there will be no more questions about succession." Mira's blood chilled. 3 nights. If the nobles swore again, if Ormond tightened his hand on the kingdom, if Cale remained a whisper behind a wall, the truth might disappear forever. Varric paused near the sealed arch. Mira did not breathe. He touched the black wax seal with 2 fingers, almost tenderly. Then he said, "Some doors stay closed because mercy demands it." That was the first moment Mira wondered if Varric believed he was doing something righteous. It did not make him less dangerous. It made him more frightening. When he left, Mira crawled back to the wall. Cale whispered, "Is he gone?" "Yes. He used to bring books." Mira stopped scraping. "Varric?" "I think so. Before his voice got cold. He said the kingdom was safer if I stayed hidden. He said my uncle carried burdens children could not understand." Mira sat back on her heels. Layer by layer, the nightmare became more complicated. The regent had stolen a throne. Varric had guarded the lie. But perhaps they had wrapped the lie in words like safety, duty, mercy, until even they could touch it without flinching. That did not change the child in the dark. "Kale," Mira whispered, "do you want to come out?" The answer came immediately. "Yes." "Even if people are angry. Even if your uncle says you should have stayed hidden. My mother said I was not alone." His voice shook. "If I come out, maybe I can find out if that was true." Mira gripped the pick again. "Then we keep digging." If you haven't subscribed yet, this is the kind of moment this channel is built on. One powerless person making a choice the powerful hoped no one would make. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and stay with me, because the most dangerous part is not breaking the wall. It is what happens after the truth breathes. By the second night of digging, Mira's hands were blistered. By the third, they bled a little, but she wrapped them and kept working. She widened the crack enough to pass a small flask through, then half a roll, then 2 fingers. When Kale touched her hand for the first time, he gasped. "You're real," he whispered. Mira pressed his thin fingers carefully. "So are you." That simple sentence changed something in both of them. Until then, Kale had been a voice and a duty. Now he was a child with a pulse, a grip, and fear he tried to hide. Mira felt the weight of him as if he were her own brother. She had no family left, but in the dark, family sometimes begins with a hand reaching through stone. On the morning of the oath feast, the castle woke like a beast polishing its teeth. Every hall smelled of beeswax and roasting meat. Servants ran with linens, silver cups, garlands of winter ivy. Musicians tuned in the gallery. Nobles arrived in fur-trimmed cloaks, stamping snow from jeweled boots. The regent's banners hung from the rafters, black field, gold hawk, red ring. Mira watched from the kitchen doorway as Regent Ormond crossed the great hall. He was not the monster she expected. That almost made her hate him more. He was handsome in a tired way, with silver at his temples and a face trained into solemn kindness. He stopped to lift a fallen glove for an elderly countess. He bent to speak to a page who had dropped a tray and told him accidents happen. When the court chaplain blessed the hall, Ormond bowed his head with convincing humility. This was how power survived, not by snarling in every corridor, by looking merciful while someone else locked the door. Mira carried trenchers until her legs ached. Twice she felt Varric watching her. Once his gaze dropped to the bandage around her palm. At midday, he cornered her near the pantry. "You look tired, Mira." "We all do, sir. Feast days are heavy." He took one step closer. "I warned you about curiosity." Mira lowered her eyes. "Yes, sir." "Curiosity is a hunger. Poor children know hunger. They think because they have been denied bread, the world owes them secrets." Mira said nothing. Varric's voice softened. "There are truths that break kingdoms. You think yourself kind, perhaps. You think hearing a cry makes you chosen. But a castle is not a nursery. Mercy for one child can become war for thousands." There it was, not denial, not confusion, knowledge. Mira looked up before she could stop herself. "Is that what you tell yourself?" Varric's expression changed. For one breath, the mask slipped, and Mira saw grief beneath it. Old grief. Sour grief. The kind that had been fed until it grew teeth. Then he seized her arm and shoved back her sleeve. Mortar dust clung to the cuff. His face went white. "Where is the tool?" Mira twisted away and ran. The pantry door slammed behind her. Varric shouted for guards. Mira darted through the bakehouse past startled cooks under a swinging tray and into the coal passage. She knew the lower castle better than any guard. She knew which doors stuck, which stairwells echoed, which corridors narrowed enough for a small girl to vanish. But Varric knew where she was going. By the time she reached the old wing through the laundry passage, boots were already pounding below. "Cale," she whispered, falling to her knees at the wall. "We have to hurry." The loosened stone shifted under her hands. She wedged the pick deep into the mortar seam and pulled. Nothing. Behind her, men shouted. She pulled again. Pain shot through her wrists. The stone groaned. "Push from your side," she cried. Cale pushed. Mira pulled. The stone slipped free and landed against her knees. Cold air washed through the hole, stale and bitter from the hidden rooms beyond. It was not wide enough. Mira attacked the next stone, no longer careful. The pick struck harder. Mortar cracked. A guard's voice echoed from the far corridor. "Here, she's here." "Cale, move back." She slammed the pick one last time. A cluster of old bricks gave way, spilling inward with a dull crash. For a second, dust filled everything. Then a face appeared in the gap. Pale, thin, eyes too large, dark hair falling into his lashes. A boy in a worn velvet coat that had been mended again and again. He looked like a prince from a painting left too long in the rain. Mira reached in. "Come." Cale tried to climb, but his arms trembled. Mira braced her feet and pulled him through the broken opening. He was lighter than a laundry bundle. Too light. He collapsed against her, coughing. Then he looked down at his own hands in the open corridor, as if he had forgotten hands could exist in light. "Mira," he whispered, "is this outside?" She almost cried. "Not yet." The guards rounded the corner. Varric came behind them, breathing hard, eyes fixed on the boy. For the first time since Mira had known him, the steward looked truly afraid. "Step away from him," he said. Mira stood in front of Cale. One guard hesitated. He had expected a thief, perhaps a mad servant, not a child in royal colors behind a broken wall. Varric saw the hesitation and snapped, "That boy is sick. He is under the regent's protection. Touch him, and you risk the whole castle." Cale gripped Mira's sleeve. Mira felt the entire weight of the next choice settle on her shoulders. If she tried to fight, they would take him. If she ran down the narrow passage, he would fall. If she screamed in the empty wing, Varric would silence the story before it reached anyone who mattered. But below them, the great hall was full. Every noble in Greyvale. Every oath-taking lord. Every person Ormond needed to believe his version of the world. Mira took Cale's hand. Then she did the one thing servants were trained never to do. She ran toward the court. The chase through Greyvale became a storm of noise. Mira half-carried Cale down the old stair, his breath tearing in his chest. A guard grabbed for her apron. She slipped free, leaving the cloth in his hand. They burst through a side passage into the minstrel's gallery, just as the feast below rose for the oath. The hall glittered with candlelight. Hundreds of faces turned toward the dais where Regent Ormond stood with one hand on the crown of Greyvale, not wearing it, but close enough to remind everyone he could. The chaplain held a silver book. "Nobles of Greyvale," he called, "do you renew your loyalty to Ormond of the royal blood, Lord Protector of the realm, guardian of the lost succession?" Mira climbed onto the gallery rail. Someone screamed. She did not know where the courage came from. Maybe from hunger. Maybe from fury. Maybe courage is what remains when every safe choice has already been taken. She shouted, "The succession is not lost." The hall went silent so fast the candles seemed to stop flickering. Every eye lifted. Mira stood above them in a torn dress, soot on her cheek, blood on her bandaged hand. Beside her, Cale clutched the rail, blinking in the fierce light. Regent Ormond's face did not change at first. Then his gaze found the boy. The crown under his hand shifted slightly. Varric appeared at the gallery entrance behind them with 2 guards. "Seize her," he hissed. But the court had seen. A murmur moved through the hall. "Who is that child? Look at his face. By heaven, he has Elowin's eyes." "Ormond, what is this?" Mira raised her voice again. It shook, but it carried. "This is Prince Calen, son of Queen Elowin and rightful heir of Greyvale. He was hidden behind the sealed wall in the east wing. He was hungry. He begged for water. I heard him." Chaos cracked open. Some nobles stood, others shouted for proof. The chaplain dropped the silver book onto the table. Guards looked to Ormond, then to the boy, then back again. Regent Ormond lifted a hand. Amazingly, the hall quieted. That was his power. Even accused, even exposed, he could command silence with one gesture. His voice was calm. "My lords and ladies, you are witnessing a cruel disturbance. The boy is indeed of royal blood, but he is not fit to rule, and he was kept from enemies for his own safety. This servant does not understand matters of state." He looked up at Mira, and for the first time, she felt the full force of him. Not rage, appeal. "Child, you have been frightened and misled. Bring him down gently. No harm will come to you if you stop now." For one awful second, Mira understood why people obeyed him. His voice made surrender sound like rest. Cale whispered, "He said that before." Mira looked at him. His small hand moved to his collar. With trembling fingers, he pulled the worn velvet aside. There, beneath his collarbone, pale against his skin, was a crescent mark, silver as moonlight. The nearest nobles gasped. An elderly duchess at the front table staggered to her feet. The royal mark. Ormond's calm broke. "Many children have marks." "Not that one," the duchess said. Her voice was old but sharp. "I was present at his birth." The hall erupted again. Varric moved. He seized Mira from behind and dragged her backward from the rail. Cale cried out and grabbed for her, but a guard caught him by the shoulders. "Enough," Varric shouted. "You fools will tear the kingdom apart over a kitchen girl's theatrics." Mira struggled, but his grip was iron. Below, Ormond did not order him to stop. That silence condemned him more than any confession. Then Cale did something Mira had not expected. The boy who had whispered through stone, who had asked if a corridor was outside, who could barely stand without swaying, lifted his chin. "Let her go." His voice was not loud, but it was royal. The guard holding him loosened his grip. Cale looked down into the hall. "My name is Calen Elowin's son. I remember my mother. I remember my uncle's ring. I remember Steward Varric telling me the kingdom needed me to disappear. And I remember this girl." His hand pointed to Mira. "She was the only person in this castle who heard me and came." The words struck harder than any accusation. Mira stopped struggling. Varric's hand slackened for half a heartbeat. It was enough. Old Bren appeared in the gallery doorway with a coal hook in his hands and 3 kitchen boys behind him holding rolling pins like swords. Mistress Sella stood beside them, face pale, jaw set. "Take your hands off my scullery girl," she said. Mira had never loved her more. Varric turned, stunned. Bren lifted the coal hook. "My daughter served the queen." "Where is she, Varric?" The steward's face collapsed inward. For years he had been a wall himself, polished, hard, built to hold back grief. Now cracks ran through him. I tried to keep order, he said, but it came out weak. You don't know what it was like that night. The Queen wanted to remove Ormond from council. Lords were gathering armies. There would have been blood in every valley. His Grace said the boy had to be hidden until the realm was stable. And my daughter? Bren asked. Varric closed his eyes. She found out. She kept bringing him food. I let her at first. Then she threatened to tell. The hall below had gone deathly quiet. Varric whispered. She was sent away, to the North Convent, alive when I last knew. Bren made a sound like a man being pulled back from a grave. Mira stared at Varric. He was not innocent, not even close, but he was also not a simple villain from a fireside tale. He was what happened when fear dressed itself as duty for too long. Regent Ormond stepped down from the dais. Varric, he said softly, warning in every syllable. Varric looked at him, and the last loyalty between them broke. No, the steward said. I have carried your mercy long enough. Ormond's face hardened. Captain, he commanded, secure the boy and arrest the servant. This court is under threat. The captain of the guard, a broad woman named Serjana, did not move. Everyone looked at her. She had served Ormond for years. Her sword had enforced his taxes, guarded his roads, stood behind his chair. If she obeyed, the truth might still be smothered in legal words and locked doors. Serjana looked up at Cale's silver mark, then at Mira's bleeding hand, then at the regent. Under whose authority? She asked. Ormond's eyes narrowed. Mine. The captain drew her sword, not toward Cale, toward the floor between herself and Ormond. Until this matter is judged by full council, I recognize no command that removes the prince from witness. A roar went through the hall. Nobles began choosing sides in real time. Some moved toward Ormond, pale with panic. Others crossed to stand beneath the gallery. The Duchess, who had attended Cale's birth, climbed onto a bench and called for the old succession laws. The chaplain found his courage and demanded the royal physician examine the mark. Ormond looked around and saw the terrible truth. Power is only power while enough people agree to pretend. The pretending had ended. He tried one last time, and in that final attempt, Mira saw the man beneath the regent. Not a demon, but a brother who had envied, feared, calculated, justified, and finally mistaken possession for protection. I kept this realm from civil war, Ormond said. His voice filled the hall. I paid debts you never saw. I bargained with border lords. I fed cities in famine. I held Greyvale together while you mourned a queen who would have broken it with softness. Cale flinched at the word mourned. Ormond looked up at him. For the first time, his voice shook. You were a child. You are still a child. They will use you. They will dress ambition in loyalty and make you their banner. Cale's face was very pale. Mira thought he might crumble. Instead, he asked, Did my mother live after you took me? The hall held its breath. Ormond did not answer. That was answer enough. Cale nodded once, as if something inside him had closed. Not healed, not yet, but closed enough to stand. I would rather be used by those who can see me, he said, than protected by those who bury me. No one spoke after that. Serjana ordered the regent escorted to his chambers under guard, not dragged, not struck. This was not vengeance. It was the first careful step back toward law. Varric surrendered his chain of office. As he passed Mira, he stopped. For a moment, she expected another threat. Instead, he said, I heard him too once. Mira looked at him. His eyes shone. The first year, through the panel, he cried for his mother. I told myself answering would make it worse. Mira said quietly, "It did make it worse." Not answering, Varric bowed his head and walked on. The aftermath did not turn into a song by morning. That is important. Stories like to end when the hidden prince steps into the light, as if truth alone can sweep floors, mend laws, and put bread in every empty hand. But truth is not a broom. It is a door. People still have to walk through it. Chaol was taken first not to the throne, but to the infirmary. The royal physician wept when he saw the condition of him. The Duchess sat by his bed and told him stories of his mother until he fell asleep holding a cup of clean water with both hands. Mira was questioned for 2 days, gently by some, suspiciously by others. A few nobles could not bear that the kingdom's greatest secret had been uncovered by a girl who scrubbed pots. They asked if someone had paid her. They asked if she had been coached. They asked why she had not reported the voice immediately. Mira answered until her throat hurt. Finally, Sir Janna stood behind her chair during one council hearing and said, "She did report it, to every conscience in this castle. Only hers answered." After that, the questions changed. Bren's daughter was found 3 weeks later in a northern convent, older, thinner, but alive. Her name was Ansel. She had indeed carried food to Chaol for years through the hidden panel, until Varric sent her away under threat. When she returned to Greyvale, Chaol knew her voice and cried for the first time in front of the council. Regent Ormond was tried before the High Lords and the Chaplain's court. His defenders spoke of roads repaired, wars avoided, grain distributed during famine. His accusers spoke of the Queen's disappearance, the false funeral, the sealed wing, the stolen childhood of a prince. Both were true. That was the hardest part for the kingdom to swallow. A man could do useful things with stolen power. He could prevent one disaster while becoming another. Good roads did not unmake a bricked-up child. Ormond was stripped of rule and sent to an island fortress where noble prisoners lived under watch, with books, letters, and no throne. Some said it was too merciful. Chaol, when asked years later, said, "A locked room is not justice when it is done in secret. It can be justice when the whole kingdom knows why the door is closed." As for Mira, the court did not know what to do with her. Some wanted to reward her with coin and send her away, because gratitude is easier when it does not have to look poverty in the eye every morning. Others suggested a servant's promotion, as if moving from pots to linens could measure what she had done. Chaol settled it. He was still weak, still learning how to walk in gardens without staring at the sky, still waking from dreams where walls breathed. But when the council asked what honor should be given to the scullery girl, he said, "Ask Mira." No one had ever asked Mira what she wanted. The question frightened her more than Varric's threats. She thought of asking for money, enough to buy a cottage, enough to never scrub another noble's plate. She thought of asking for Bren's pension, for better meals in the servants' hall, for the kitchen boys to stop being struck when their hands shook from cold. In the end, she asked for 3 things. First, that no servant in Greyvale could be punished without witness and record. Second, that the sealed wing be opened, cleaned, and turned into a school for children of the castle workers. Third, that she be taught to read. The council stared at her. Chaol smiled for the first time in public. "Granted," he said, though he was not crowned yet, and the Duchess laughed through tears because everyone knew the council would not dare refuse. Months passed. Winter loosened. The eastern shutters were opened. Dust flew out of the old royal rooms like trapped years escaping. Workers removed the bricks from the archway stone by stone. Mira stood nearby when the last of the wall came down. She expected to feel triumph. Instead, she cried, not loudly, not prettily. She cried for the child who had counted days by footsteps, for Queen Alawan, whose full fate was still being pieced together from frightened witnesses and hidden letters, for Bren's daughter, for every servant who had heard something wrong and swallowed the truth because survival demanded silence. Cale stood beside her, healthier now, though still too thin. He reached for her hand. "When I am king," he said, "people will listen when you speak." Mira wiped her face with her sleeve. "They should listen before someone is king." He considered this seriously. "Then we will make that a law." She laughed, and the sound surprised them both. On the day of Cale's coronation, the castle filled again with nobles, banners, candles, and music. But this time, Mira did not watch from the kitchen doorway. She stood near the front in a plain blue dress the seamstresses had made for her, uncomfortable under so many eyes. Bren stood on one side of her, Ansel on the other. Mistress Sella, who claimed she was only there to ensure the feast was served properly, cried into a napkin and threatened anyone who noticed. Cale walked to the dais without the regent's hand on his shoulder. When the chaplain lifted the crown, the boy looked across the hall until he found Mira. For a heartbeat, the grand court vanished. There was only the wall, the crack, the soaked strip of cloth, the first touch of fingers in darkness. Then Cale bowed his head and became king. After the ceremony, when the cheering had softened into bells, he did something no one expected. He stepped down from the dais, crossed the hall, and stopped in front of Mira. The king of Greyvale bowed to a former scullery girl. A murmur rushed through the nobles. Cale said, clear enough for every corner to hear, "The first oath of my reign is to the one who taught me what a crown is for, not to hide children behind walls, not to make silence look like peace. A crown is for hearing the smallest voice in the farthest room." Mira could not speak, so she curtsied badly and whispered, "Then listen well." He smiled. "I will need help." She looked around at the hall that had once seemed built only to crush people like her. It still frightened her. Maybe it always would. But fear no longer felt like a command. It felt like a warning bell, and bells were meant to be heard. Years later, visitors to Greyvale would be shown the open arch in the eastern corridor, not hidden, not sealed. Above it, carved into pale stone, were words King Calen ordered placed there on his 18th birthday. "No wall is holy that is built to silence the innocent." Children from the workers' school passed beneath those words every morning, carrying slates and bread with butter. Sometimes their teacher, a young woman named Mira, who read slowly at first and then faster every year, would pause by the stones and touch the place where the first crack had opened. She never touched it with fear. She touched it to remember, because the world is full of sealed walls. Some are made of brick. Some are made of rank, money, family secrets, old laws, or people saying, "This is not your concern." And behind many of them, someone is whispering, hoping the next person who hears will be brave enough not to walk away. So now I want to ask you again, was Mira reckless, or was she exactly what the kingdom needed? Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more emotional stories where the smallest act of courage changes everything. Mira began as the poorest girl in the castle. She had no title, no army, no family name worth writing down. All she had was the one thing everyone more powerful than her had abandoned. She heard a child begging in the dark, and she answered.